when we think of the Asian century, I think immediately, at least in my case, I tend to think of East Asia. Northeast Asia in particular. Think of the Korean experience, the Japanese experience, the Chinese experience, the Taiwanese experience. And demographically, these are all very old countries. They're getting older. And so their kind of peak has to some degree passed them and maybe will return, but demographically speaking, being old and in China's case male is not a way to promote reform. It just doesn't tend to happen. So I don't see, for this very basic demographic reason, I don't see that there will be an East Asian century, a Northeast Asian century. Now maybe there will be in a place like Indonesia or the Philippines, which is growing, which does have a young and vibrant population. But maybe that's not what we think about in the top of our minds when we ask this question. But so we may have an Asian century, but it's not going to be the same Asian century that we may perceive at the beginning of the conversation. There's also a lot of information, and Devin Stewart is a good friend of mine and turned me on to this idea of the gravity theory of trade. And the gravity theory of trade also suggests that if trade is falling rapidly, that would suggest the economy of China is shrinking, or at least not growing near as fast. So I would be very dubious of the numbers. I see a lot of money flowing out of China in a variety of different ways. This does not suggest that the economy is very healthy and that people have confidence in it. So I think that we would be fools to suggest that the last 30 years of Chinese economic growth are going to reflect the next 30 years. And these new realities are going to alter whether or not China can indeed be the leader of an Asian century, which as the historically most important country in Asia, it has. And then if we add on to that, introductions by Xi Jinping about the Asia for the Asians. I don't know if you've heard this term that he mentioned, that he coined. He was talking about Asia for the Asians, and it kind of ended with a thud. The Asian countries didn't respond and say, great, Asia for the Asians, let's throw these US SOBs out. That was not their response. In fact, what's interesting is if you go back to the late 90s, you have this discussion about when are Asians going to throw the US out of Asia? When is our time going to come to an end? And in fact, I would say Xi Jinping's policies over the last few years, nobody's asking that question. In fact, as we heard today, delegations from Vietnam and other places are showing up in America saying, please don't leave. We'd like to do more kind of security-oriented, more trade, we'd like to keep you here. And this is something that I think has changed. So it does suggest, as Professor Song rightfully said, that the American presence is going to be there for the long haul. So I would say these three reasons suggest that we definitely won't see a Northeast Asian century, but we may see different points of leadership in Asia, but probably not in Northeast Asia.